My God, how interesting it is to be the last speaker. Of course, my sincere gratitude to the team at Parasite, at Savvy. Thank you, Katarina Tewa, because bringing 2 references to the Pacific in 3 days. Given we are sitting here on the edge of our magnificent ocean, oh God, it started. For all the ladies, I am emo as fuck today. Having 2 is better than 1. Your presence here, Barnabas' presence here, has been hugely affirming. Oh God, paragraph 1. Thank you, Auntie, for perhaps unknowingly booking me on Fiji Airways from Nadi to Hong Kong, because I was brought here by my people, and to travel so far from home and the care of my people means a lot. Thank you, Cosmin. We met in Fiji last year. I told him I don't engage much with Asia because of the whole size thing, size insecurity, I guess. Whilst our ocean covers 1/3 of the world's surface, our global visibility for anything more than rugby, holiday destinations, perhaps political instability, and now phosphate mining, always feels like we're still asking for permission to be present, and I do not subscribe. To be quite honest, this whole conference has really engorged my imposter syndrome gland. I've sat here thinking about schooling and unschooling, about how much I resist academic framing, how much I hated art school, where I first encountered Bauhaus, oops. I've sat here realizing that I didn't send the appropriate documentation to the New Zealand Welfare Office to explain that whilst I am technically unemployed, I am travelling again to speak at a thing that I will probably get a small honorarium for, but it is professionally advantageous. So please, can I again get a waiver on the rule that welfare payments are cut as soon as beneficiaries leave the country? I am a solo parent to a wonderful girl child who has been my ultimate teacher. Motherhood has been the most important class, yet there is no curriculum. And the bottom line I have come to learn after 5 years is you try your best. So being here amongst scholars, wordiness, very well articulated wokeness has sent me into a small existential crisis. I want to say that everything I do that feels right goes against the grain. I resist academic framing because there is a power that goes with what is validated in the academy's eyes, and that excludes the parts of my world, my communities, that are the realist. The academy and its institutions are inextricably connected to imperialist structures that create environments that we have to survive in but are not built for us to thrive in. I've produced maybe over 80 exhibitions in the past 15 years and not written one curatorial essay over 2,000 words. I'm sorry to say, Christian, in all those texts for all those 80 shows, I've probably only included less than 10 footnotes. I have grown fatigued in my 15th year of producing exhibitions of white-splaining. I sit more comfortably in the discomfort this position creates now more than ever, as I've been able to establish my own space, an independent gallery, deep, deep in the hood. When my community, I should apologize to the children, my presentation does include swearing and nudity, FYI. When my community encourages me and sends me supportive text messages, as I have received many since I've been here, they often sound like this: fuck it up, fuck them up, sis, fuck shit up. It is encouraging because we are from a community that is constantly pushing against the grain. Every meeting, every show, every conversation with institutions, with mainstream media, at conferences is a win if shit is fucked up. Someone said yesterday, and I hear this a lot in this kind of setting, that decolonization has become a tired trope. To be honest, this is when I walk out the room. It is too rich, too entitled, too stomach. Perhaps decolonisation has become a tired word in the art world, but do you do the work? When decolonisation is an embodied labour, when you decolonise in your work and the world you create for your children, and you don't stop because it has fallen out of trend. To be honest, I'm even less interested in an art world that is post-decolonisation. As Andreas said in our first paper at this conference, know the superpowers and the weaknesses of your collective. My career has been built largely on my superpower of writing funding applications. I have benefited and have benefited institutions because, as Clara said, my skin is the colour that makes you feel funded. You should know that New Zealand's population is predominantly Pākehā, colonial settler communities with largely British ancestry. The second largest group is Māori, tangata whenua, Indigenous people. The third is Asian communities. And the fourth, with less than 8% of the country's population, is the Pacific Islander community. In diaspora, and colour and identity take different forms. Assimilation is a dominant culture environment. In a dominant culture environment is how you progress, but the resistance is strong. We are in a cultural climate in New Zealand where the thirst for diversity is palpable. Our National Arts Investment Agency introduced a diversity policy in 2015, and long-term investment clients accounting for the country's largest public arts institutions have since had to deliver on diversity as a key performance indicator in their contractual obligations. Side note, a job was advertised yesterday for Art Space, one of the country's leading contemporary art galleries, for a newly funded role in line with the diversity thirst. This will probably go to a performatively woke, white/ethnically ambiguous woman who can articulate how exactly one manages the demands of both biculturalism and multiculturalism. I work exclusively, almost exclusively, with contemporary Pacific artists because the Pacific Ocean is my comfort zone, my pleasure zone, my grounding. The Pacific Ocean connects us as Pacific Islanders. It is our sameness and our difference. The Pacific Ocean has birthed a form of scholarship that is deeply rooted in Indigenous epistemological framing. It is the likes of the late Apeli Hauofa. The late Teresia Tewa, Kati's sister, the late Grace Mira Molissa, who have inspired my thinking, set my heart on fire, and stabilized my journey into uncharted waters. I arrived at curating through a sculptural practice and through service, as a public servant and as a Pacific Islander living and working in a community that faced and continues to face systemic inequalities, high levels of deprivation, and fairly pronounced social exclusion from mainstream institutions, including art galleries. I arrived at curating to serve my people. I have lived as a Pacific Islander in diaspora almost all my life, but through family, community, upholding and passing on cultural identity, and tattooing my skin, I've maintained my connection to the Pacific Ocean as a means of survival and self-preservation. By being embedded in Pacific spaces where Pacific Islanders feel comfortable, open, relevant, I draw strength and inspiration. I've managed 3 art galleries in the area of South Auckland, New Zealand, home of the country's largest concentration of Pacific Islanders. But in large part, the arts economy amongst grassroots Pacific communities has little to do with galleries or the hierarchies of the art world or art school. Our Indigenous creative practices and their value systems are inextricably connected to our cultures, rituals, ancestries, and islands. Galleries can be hostile places. They can alienate people when the frames of reference for reading, engaging, and valuing visual language are over-intellectualized and disconnected from the capacity for us as the audience to understand the space we hold between the work and our hearts and minds. I've been invested for 15 years in understanding the mode of creating Pacific art exhibitions and events in Pacific space, accessible to Pacific Islander audiences, because that is where we see our worlds reflected, in all its nuanced forms, where we have agency to speak to the work and allow it to speak to us. It's where we can affect change for our communities. It is a conscious decision to avoid the filtering of our Pacific experience through persistently colonial infrastructure that is deeply, deeply embedded in the arts in New Zealand and the colonized South Pacific. Curating has become a form of tackling the wounds of colonisation to re-empower Pacific Islanders by affirming their presence and mana and engaging our communities as critically relevant audiences for gallery-based contemporary art and the worlds we inhabit as arts professionals with one foot in the grassroots and the other sometimes reluctantly in the art world. The exhibition I propose to discuss today, Lain Blow You Me, Our People, Our Lines, was delivered just last month at Vunilagi Vou, the independent gallery I was able to open in South Auckland earlier this year. Vunilagi Vou is based on the principle of positioning Pacific art consciously within Pacific space. It is located in Otahuhu, a suburb in South Auckland with a diverse ethnic population, but renowned for its lo-fi, budget-friendly shopping district, which caters heavily to the Pacific diaspora community. The gallery is located in the heart of the commercial area of Otahuhu, in an arcade where every shop is owned and operated by Pacific Islanders. Lain Blow You Me, Our People, Our Lines was dedicated to the work of Papua New Guinean-Australian mark maker / tattoo practitioner Julia Mage'au Gray. We've known each other for a number of years, worked together on events, exhibitions and tattooing, but this was an opportunity to focus in on her work and her contribution to female tattoo practice and revival. I'm interested in tattooing because the body becomes a story. I prescribe to the idea that placing a tattoo between you and me is an intervention, a way to control the way my body is perceived, to distort the perceptions and misconceptions that affect the ways we move through the world. For me, tattooing has become a deeply political act of authoring my own experience, defining and asserting my connections to Fiji and the Pacific Ocean. Julia has been marking me since 2014. She arrived at her mark-making practice via dance and photography, and the decision to make a documentary film in 2012, her film Tep-Tok, Reading Between Our Lines, is based on the journey of 4 Papua New Guinean-Australian women as they trace their relationships of Melanesian tattoo from their respective regions to practices across the Pacific. They document conversations in Papua New Guinea that reveal where tattooing practices stopped between their grandmothers' and mothers' generations. The film exposes stories of trauma, of erasure. It is a filmic archive of Pacific women's bodies, filmed by Pacific women. Throughout the film, the women embody the research being marked along the way, discussing meaning and mana with Pacific people across Oceania, Australia, and New Zealand. For Julia, the film was a catalyst for Melanesian mark making to be revived and survive. The movement required more than awareness, it needed action. In 2014, Julia shifted her focus from choreography and filmmaking to learning the tattoo art form. She took the revival of skin marking from research to practice. She trained with hand tool practitioners in New Zealand and travelled back and forth between Papua New Guinea, Australia and New Zealand before choosing to settle in Auckland and start tattooing full-time. In 2015, Julia contributed her experience and skills to the movement to revive Fijian women's tattoo, Vaingia, through a creative research project that I had the privilege of co-curating with Dr. Tarisi Vunindilo. Similarly to Papua New Guinea, Fijian female tattoo was eradicated through the adoption of Christianity, but unlike Papua New Guinea, our tattoo practice has been rendered invisible through the process of generational colonisation. When missionaries told our women to cover their skin, our bodies became invisible, neglectfully excluded from the written histories of our existence. Gradually, women stopped marking their bodies. The generational impact of this erasure is that the cultural memory of our tattoo practice has almost entirely disappeared. The Vengia project spanned 9 months of collective research and dialogue between 7 Fijian women based in Australia and New Zealand. The group travelled to Suva, Fiji in September 2015 to deliver talks and open up discussion with Fijian communities about the information that had been found. Notably, Fiji is the only country in the Pacific that holds the largest collection of its own cultural objects in its national museum. For every other country in the region, the largest collections of their items of cultural value sit in museum vaults and vitrines, accruing value for their institutional hosts in faraway places. At Fiji Museum, we hosted an open day, sharing printouts of archival material, drawings and motifs discovered in museum publications, and invited the audience to draw their own tattoos on appropriately Fijian forms. The dialogue was enriching, learning about a practice that was reserved exclusively for and practiced by women and girls, which is, by even today's standards, some of the most badass tattooing, was uplifting and deeply empowering. Facilitating this dialogue emboldened women to remember that our ancestors were strong, brave, upheld beauty standards which were entirely our own. On the Fiji Museum veranda, Julia tattooed. It was the act that brought it all together, the moment when the information or research transitioned from the mind to the body, from paper to skin. The act of marking the skin, breaking it, letting it bleed, leaving an indelible mark. The act is the pinnacle of revival. Julia started to mark Fijian women that week. Informed by the motifs and clues we were finding, the revival was set in motion. In the excitement about the project and the energies that flowed from it, we became inundated with requests to define the meaning of the marks, as if a visual vocabulary could be downloaded to be read and understood, and suddenly Vengia would make sense to anyone. Whilst some ethnographic notes were found on what the motifs represented from the perspective of the non-Fijian author, it feels as if meaning associated with the visual language is not something we will ever fully understand, because colonisation has erased this critical information in the collective minds of Fijians themselves. It is for this reason that leaning into understanding Papua New Guinean female tattooing through the work and knowledge of Julia Mage'au Gray has made such a valuable contribution to the revival of Vengia. 2 things happened with the Vengia project that I didn't anticipate. The tattoo world has defined a language of symbolic meaning that enables anyone to select visual vocabulary from anywhere in the world and own it, embody it, essentially redefining its meaning each time it is applied to new skin. In terms of ceremonial meaning attached to tattoo from the Pacific, the visual vocabulary of our marks is essentially part of a free and open and entirely unregulated market. Seeing the ways Maori and Polynesian tattoo has been popularized on a global scale, the artists in the Vengia project had an understandable reluctance to share findings of their research in relation to the motifs and actual mark making of the practice. There was a strong sense that the marks needed to be protected. The result, from my curatorial perspective, was an exhibition that spoke less to the richness of the process and the immense and emotional discovery that the artists had enabled in themselves and the communities who participated in the project in Fiji, and more about a kind of protectionism that guarded the information, held it close. The exhibition felt cold. disconnected. It didn't help that it was held in an institutional gallery, which at the time, pre-diversity funding, had little to no measures to engage Pacific audiences and communities. Whilst I severed my ties with the Vaingear project, Julia and I have continued to work together. Last year, we travelled to the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Cambridge and spent time with the largest collection of Vaingear instruments held by any museum. We were also consulting with a luxury design firm in London who have engaged Julia to collaborate on a suite of furniture that will be launched in January 2020 with an exhibition at their Marylebone premises. Our intention with Lain Blow You Me, Our People, Our Lines at Vunilagi Vou was to test some ideas and create a setting to film a 3-channel video work which will be central to the London show. Julia has continued to tattoo me, and through multiple settings, we have talked at length about meaning and mana of wearing Melanesian marks. The title of this exhibition, Lain Blow You Me, in Papua New Guinean Pidgin, roughly translates as Our People, Our Lines. Line represents not only a physical line, a dominant element in Julia's tattoo visual vocabulary, but line as in genealogy, a familial or ancestral trajectory. The exhibition was an effort to demonstrate the contemporary settings of this practice in diaspora and as a mobile art form connected through social media with its roots firmly in Mekeo, Papua New Guinea, Fiji, and Melanesia as a whole. As an exhibition in a small independent gallery, Lain Blow You Me was an opportunity to author a Melanesian female perspective on the practice, centralising the voices and experience of Melanesian women. The difference between positioning this type of narrative in a mainstream read white space is that cult curatorial framing didn't have to lean towards educational elements of defining the practice in the context of geography, history, and relationality to dominant culture in New Zealand. It was simply women telling their stories in their own way, full stop. The intention of the exhibition was to demonstrate the socially embedded nature of Julia's practice and Melanesian contemporary female tattoo as a reflection of the wider collectivism which underpins sociological frameworks across the Pacific. The exhibition is a lo-fi village aesthetic, an approach which could be packed down and installed at a venue in the Pacific or on a museum veranda. It is a site-specific, purposefully produced realization in materials that could be touched with hands and tears by children. It was made to be connected with physically. It centralizes the voice of Melanesian women through texts, narratives, and illustrating their experience with 2 main components: the revival wall, a hard copy Instagram record of Julia's work, movements, and inspiration from the last 6 months, and stories by Michaelin Pokerup, Papua New Guinea, and Emmeline Matangi. Michaelin Pokerup and Emmeline Matangi are 2 Auckland-based Melanesian women invited to share insights into their experiences of being marked and wearing the marks from their own perspectives in whatever way they felt like telling the story. This part of the exhibition drew on the mode of early ethnographic journals to draw reference to the problematic way knowledge has been created, particularly about tattoo, based on white male colonist experience in the context of Fiji, where little recorded history exists about Fijian tattoo. Baron von Hugel's The Fiji Journals, 1875 to 1877, are one such source, which provide insights to the ways tattoo and Fijian women were languaged and encountered. Side note, the language of our bodies and physical features has deeply wounded Indigenous women and continues to affect the ways we see ourselves. This tweet came across my timeline yesterday. Language matters. Representation matters. As a mother of a brown girl, I am particularly sensitive to the ways the world tells her that she is enough. Michaelin and Emmeline were given full creative license to frame their own stories and contexts first-hand, first-person, languaging and illustrating their own experiences. Neither are visual artists, and each developed their stories independently. Emmeline has spent most of her professional career as a primary school educator, and her visual narrative had a strong school poster board aesthetic. She even noted her learning outcomes and her challenges, and offered audiences an insight into the context of where being tattooed sat and sits within her life as a teacher, a rugby player, a wife, and a mother. Emmeline's daughter, Ray Dawn, aged 9, was with her during some of her sessions. Emmeline notes the conversation she had with her daughter and invited her to make contributions to her narrative. She drew pictures of what her marks might look like one day and expressed her view that hers would be different from her mum's. Emmeline noted that the meaning of Vengia is her daughter. It is the transmission of value and knowledge between generations that these marks represent. It is affirming the pride in our bodies, reconnecting with an ancestral feminine power that we know changes the ways our daughters look at us and look at themselves. Michaelin is a full-time social worker. Her story consisted of 3 diary entries written about the day before she was marked by Julia for the first time, the day of the marking, and 1 year later. Her written accounts are factual, as if evidence-based. They express emotion cautiously. Hanging amongst her text and photographs is a family fibre skirt from Mekeo, Central Province, Papua New Guinea. As Julia has often asserted, Melanesian marks are inextricably connected to dance and ritual in traditional contexts. As a mark maker, it is her grounding in dance that enables her to read the body and mark it appropriately. Michaelin's marks are brought to life when she dances. Her family fibre skirt is the sound, the feeling, the smell, and the movement associated with her connections to home. Michaelin's narrative has such a different starting point to Emmeline's. The cultural loss of tattoo in her family is only 1 generation deep. And a photograph of her bubu, her grandmother, was central to her story. What both Michaelin and Emmeline represent in their stories is the social embeddedness of the decision to be marked, the tattooing process, and the community around each woman that is affected by their marks. They define their communities in their stories, those who their marks connect them to, and who they are defined by as a part of that collective. Whilst their journeys have happened in diaspora, disjointed from their island contexts, the oral narratives of connection, of geography and movement are embedded in each line and each dot. The second element of the exhibition, the Revival Wall, consisted of 73 images from Julia's Instagram feed, documenting roughly 6 months of practice and inspiration. Embedded in the photography, hung in the Instagram grid format, was a monitor screening her documentary film, Tep Talk, the catalyst for her mark-making practice, in addition to short video works made as stop-motion performances. The wall represented a community of largely Pacific Islander women, marked in New Zealand, Australia, Borneo, and London, connected by Julia, connected by their marks, connected by the internet. Each image had a handwritten caption by Julia, giving the moment voice and context. The wall as a whole aimed to demonstrate Julia's visual vocabulary and its frame of reference from Papua New Guinean tattoo. The majority of the images were taken after marking sessions, with women looking full, glowing in the moment. Many of us speak about the moments after being tattooed by Julia where you feel like the marks have always been there, that they sit so naturally with the ways we hold our bodies. There's something in the eyes of these women. And Julia says, it's the moment they shift, energies shift, We move forward in our lives, marked, changing the people around us, and that sentence doesn't make sense. Sorry about that. Lain Blow You Me, Our People, Our Lines filled Vunilagi Vou's 25 square metre gallery space with 119 photographs, 7 films, 5 Papua New Guinean Bilum bags, 6 framed prints, and 1 whispering grass skirt. The exhibition ran for the month of September at Vunilagi Vou and attracted broad audiences, but most significantly Indigenous women, mothers and daughters, Papua New Guineans and Fijians. We closed the exhibition 2 weeks ago, today, live. This is why I don't have time to write papers, sorry. We closed the exhibition 2 weeks ago today with a live tattooing session between Julia's daughter, Mage'au Gray, and Julia's mother, Mali. Mage'au has been Julia's stretcher, skin stretcher, her little grasshopper since the age of 11. When she turned 16 this year, she was tattooed on the back of her thighs as the significant starting point of her tattoo journey. Mali, Julia's mother, is one of the generation that tattooing skipped. Whilst it was not her first marks, she had never been tattooed by her granddaughter. The session was filmed for our exhibition in London in January as a performance of intergenerational cultural transmission, of revival and familial connections of Melanesian women marking Melanesian women. Upon completion, Julia's dance class, who had been learning about Papua New Guinean movement, adorned Mekeo grass skirts and face paint and danced Mali and Mage'au out of the Vunilagi Vou studio and into the arcade. Julia's gonna hate this. When Julia is asked, "What do your tattoos mean?" she says, "Everything to me and nothing to you." She's blunt like that. In the words of Tarika Bolatangithi, her marks are her sacred geometry. This is my nudity warning. For me, my Vengia, my Fijian tattoos have changed the way I hold my body and how my daughter sees our bodies. My loin markings have shifted generational taboos and broken curses. With my shifts, my community shifts. For every woman, whether in the village or in diaspora, the meaning of being marked is theirs. It is not their job to define their choices, their connections, and rationales to anyone. I curated Lain Blow You Me, Our People, Our Lines out of gratitude for Julia Mage'au Gray. When I meet other women who she has marked, I joke that we are all Julia's children. In hosting this exhibition, I had the privilege of talking tattoo and meaning with Indigenous women every day for a month in a room, a small room, where our visibility, our voices, and moments of joy and pride were more pronounced, more concentrated than I have ever encountered in a gallery setting. Through all the combined energies that informed Lain Blow You Me, the space that was created managed to negotiate the terrain of protection, of ownership, of amplification, and sharing like a kind of lo-fi, offline social network of fierce brown women. For the Pacific, within the current climate of global warming and the shifting geopolitics of our region, our connectedness, our agency and presence in the wider world is more vital than ever. So from one little gallery in South Auckland to you here in Hong Kong, Vinaka Vakalevu, thank you for listening.